I should say at the outset that I was right about her from the beginning. I am aware that this is not the most gracious way to begin an account of my closest friend's marriage. But I am a private secretary by profession and a precise man by temperament, and the record ought to reflect that when Miss Verity Ashton arrived at Caervan Hall on the 14th of October, I looked at her for approximately 40 seconds in the entrance hall. The way she held the portmanteau herself rather than waiting for the footman, the way she took in the dimensions of the room with one unhurried sweep before settling her attention on the housekeeper. And I thought, this will be interesting. My name is Cresswell Dane. I have served as private secretary to Alaric Vane, Duke of Caervan, for 11 years, and in that time I have watched a great many people arrive at Caervan Hall. Diplomatists, members of Parliament, generals, a bishop once who left looking considerably less certain of himself than when he had arrived. None of them, not the generals, not the bishop, had ever genuinely unsettled the Duke. I want to be accurate about what Alaric was at the time Miss Ashton arrived. He was 37 years old and had been the Duke of Caervan since he was 22, which meant he had spent 15 years being the most uncontested man in any room he entered. He was not cruel. He was not, in the conventional sense, arrogant. He was simply correct, so consistently and so thoroughly that after a while the people around him had stopped checking. He had opinions about estate management, about the education of his ward, about the proper conduct of parliamentary committees, about the drainage systems of the Cornish coast, and he was right about all of them, and everyone knew he was right, and so no one argued. I had over 11 years developed a private theory about this. I believed that the uncontested life, the life in which no one ever pushes back, does something to a man that is not good for him. It does not make him worse exactly. It simply makes him less present, less surprised, less alive to the possibility that the world contains things he has not yet considered. Alaric was brilliant and capable and entirely correct about drainage systems, and he was also, if I am honest, beginning to resemble a very well-maintained clock, accurate, reliable, and not particularly interested in anything. Then Miss Ashton arrived, and on her first evening contradicted him about the migratory patterns of Cornish choughs, and everything changed. I should explain about the ward. Her name was Isolde. She was 9 years old, the daughter of Alaric's late cousin, and she had come to Caervan Hall 8 months earlier when both her parents died of fever within a week of each other. Alaric had taken her in without ceremony and with genuine, if somewhat helpless, devotion. He did not know what to do with a 9-year-old girl. He knew what to do with estate ledgers and parliamentary briefs and the Cornish cliff drainage system, but Isolde required something different. She required, specifically, someone who could keep up with her questions, which were numerous, relentless, and frequently unanswerable. She had gone through 2 governesses in 8 months. The first had lasted 6 weeks before resigning with a letter that described Isolde as exhausting beyond reasonable professional endurance. The second had lasted 4 months, which I considered a respectable effort, and had left citing an incompatibility of intellectual temperament, which was a polite way of saying that Isolde had corrected her pronunciation of 3 Latin words and refused to retract the corrections when asked. Miss Verity Ashton came to us on the recommendation of a Truro solicitor who had known her father, a barrister, long deceased, and who described her as thoroughly educated, entirely composed, and constitutionally incapable of being intimidated. He meant this as a recommendation. Having observed the previous 2 governesses, I agreed it was one. She was 26. She had a face that was pleasant without being remarkable, brown hair that she wore tidily without particular vanity, and gray eyes that had the quality of a person who is always paying more attention than they appear to be. She was dressed well but plainly, in the manner of a woman who has made a decision about what her resources are, and spends them with intention rather than hope. Alaric met her in the entrance hall on the evening of her arrival, while I stood slightly to one side taking notes on something that no longer seems important. "Miss Ashton," he said, "I trust the journey was acceptable. The road from Truro is in poor condition between the 2nd and 4th miles," she said. "The drainage has been neglected. You have chalk substrate there, which means the water table sits high in autumn. The ruts will be impassable by December without attention." There was a pause. "I am aware of the road," Alaric said. "I mention it because the approach to an estate is the first thing visitors see," she said pleasantly. "It affects impressions." "I have managed this estate for 15 years, Alaric said. "Yes," she said. "I expect the road was better then." I wrote nothing in my notebook. I was too interested in what was happening. Alaric looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has heard an unexpected sound in a room he believed to be empty. Then he said, with complete control, "Mrs. Thwaite will show you to your rooms," and left the entrance hall, and I followed him. And once we were in the corridor, he said, without looking at me, "Where did you find her?" "Truro solicitor," I said. "Recommended her as constitutionally incapable of being intimidated." "He was not wrong," Alaric said. "Is that a problem?" He did not answer immediately. "See that she is comfortable," he said, and went to his study. I went back to the entrance hall. Miss Ashton was talking to Isolde, who had appeared at the top of the staircase in her nightgown to investigate the new arrival. I caught the end of the exchange. "Are you going to leave?" Isolde was asking. The others left. "I haven't decided yet," Miss Ashton said. "I've only just arrived. Ask me again in a month." "What would make you leave?" "Boredom," Miss Ashton said. "I don't anticipate it." Isolde came down 3 steps. "Do you know about chuffs?" Pyrrhocorax," Miss Ashton said. "Red-billed. They nest on sea cliffs. There are breeding colonies along this coastline. I expect you've seen them." Isolde came down the remaining stairs at speed. "Come and see the cliff path," she said. "In the morning, they come at dawn." "In the morning," Miss Ashton agreed. "Tonight you should be in bed." Isolde went back upstairs without argument, which was, I would later understand, the first miracle. The second came 3 days later, at dinner. Alaric held occasional dinners for neighboring landowners and their families, matters of local obligation rather than pleasure. On this occasion there were 8 of us at the table, and Miss Ashton was present in her capacity as Isolde's governess, seated toward the lower end. The conversation had turned to the natural history of the Cornish coast, and a gentleman named Penhallow, who owned the adjacent estate and held decided opinions on most subjects, was holding forth about the winter migration of seabirds. "The chuffs, of course, do not migrate," Penhallow was saying. "They winter here. Unlike the guillemots, which go north." "The chuffs do not migrate, that's correct," Miss Ashton said from the lower end of the table. "But the guillemots don't go north. They disperse offshore. They follow the winter fish populations west into the Atlantic. The coastal colonies thin out rather than relocate." Everyone at the table looked at her. In 11 years, I had never heard a governess speak at one of Alaric's dinners unless directly addressed. "I have it on good authority that they go north," Penhallow said, with the particular stiffness of a man whose authority has been questioned in company. "Whose authority?" Miss Ashton asked. "The relevant ornithological literature. Selby's Illustrations describes the winter dispersal pattern in considerable detail," she said. "He is quite clear on the Atlantic movement. I can find the volume after dinner if you would like to verify it." Penhallow did not answer. I looked at Alaric. His expression was entirely controlled, which meant nothing. He had spent 15 years perfecting control. But I had known him for 11 of those 15 years, and I saw, very briefly, something shift in his eyes. Not anger. Something more like attention. The quality of a man who has just heard the unexpected sound again and this time is genuinely trying to identify it. After dinner, when the guests had gone, Alaric came to find me in the library where I was pretending to file correspondence. She was right about the guillemots, he said. I know, I said. She spoke across Penhallow. She did. At my table. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She was still right. Yes, I said. He picked up a letter, looked at it without reading it, set it down. She should have been more circumspect. Probably, I said. Was Penhallow going to correct himself? Alaric did not answer this. He left the library, and I sat for a moment in the quiet, and I thought, yes, this is going to be very interesting indeed. The arguments began in earnest in the second week. They were not, I should say, the kind of arguments that involve raised voices or broken crockery. They were conducted with complete civility, at normal conversational volume, and they were devastating. Miss Ashton had the barrister's habit, acquired, I gathered, from listening to her father work through cases at the dinner table throughout her childhood, of identifying the precise point at which an argument rested and pressing on it with the calm, methodical attention of someone testing the load-bearing capacity of a beam. The estate drainage came first. She had been on the cliff path with Isolde every morning for a week, and she had, apparently, been looking at the land as well as the chuffs. She presented her observations to Alaric one afternoon in the estate office, where I was working at the secondary desk, and did not leave because I had decided I was indispensable to the conversation. The eastern field drainage is directing water toward the foundation of the lower barn, she said. The ground there is soft. Another winter and you will have structural problems. The eastern field drainage was designed by a professional surveyor, Alaric said. In what year? A pause, 1841. The cliff path has shifted since then, she said. You can see the new water channels from the headland. They run northeast now, not east. The surveyor's drainage assumed an eastern flow. The barn wasn't there in 41 either, I imagine. Silence. I can show you on the cliff path on Thursday morning, she said, if you would like to see it. I am aware of my own land, Alaric said. I expect you are, she said. I expect you're also aware of the eastern barn's foundations. I simply thought it worth mentioning. She picked up the estate map she had brought with her, rolled it with neat efficiency, and left. Alaric did not speak for approximately 30 seconds. She mapped it, he said finally. She mapped my drainage on a walk with a 9-year-old. It appears so, I said. How long has she been here? 11 days, I said. He stood up. She is entirely infuriating, he said. Yes, I said. She is also. Correct, I said. He said nothing. He took his coat and went out, and I believe he went to look at the eastern barn's foundations, because when he returned 2 hours later his boots were muddier than a man who had simply walked the gardens, and he said nothing about it, and the following week a drainage surveyor arrived without announcement. The ward bloomed, I should say, the way a plant blooms when it has finally been given the right conditions. Isolde had been, in the months before Miss Ashton's arrival, a child of considerable unhappiness, dressed as difficult behavior, demanding, contrary, prone to silences that worried everyone, and monologues about birds that worried no one but were exhausting. With Miss Ashton she became something else entirely, purposeful. They were on the cliff path at dawn regardless of weather, cataloging the chuff pears. They had a notebook. They had a system. Isolde was learning Latin because, Miss Ashton had told her, the binomial nomenclature was in Latin and she couldn't properly write a scientific record without it, which was the most effective motivation for Latin study I have ever witnessed. Alaric watched this with an expression I had not seen on him before. I would have called it longing almost, not for the child exactly, but for the thing she had become, alive, specific, full of direction. He had not known how to give her that. Miss Ashton had provided it in 11 days. He was not grateful precisely. Gratitude is simple. What he felt was something more uncomfortable. the particular discomfort of a person who has discovered that something important was not being done, and that they were not the one doing it. It made him sharper in their arguments. It made him push back harder, as though he could re-establish some equilibrium by winning a point he had thus far failed to win. He did not win. There was the argument about Isolde's curriculum. He felt she ought to have more music and fewer sciences. She told him that Isolde showed no particular aptitude or interest in music and considerable aptitude and passion for natural history, and that forcing the first at the expense of the second was the precise way to make a gifted child feel that her gifts were the wrong kind. He said that a young woman of Isolde's station would require social accomplishments. She said that what Isolde would require was a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and that she currently had one, and he should be cautious about taking it away. He said nothing for a long moment and then said, "Continue as you are," and left the room. There was the argument about the tenants. A family named Trewin had fallen behind on their rent, illness, a bad autumn, and Alaric's estate manager had recommended issuing a formal notice as a matter of procedure. Miss Ashton, who had apparently become acquainted with Mrs. Trewin on the cliff path, appeared in the estate office with a counter-proposal. "Give them until March," she said. "The elder Trewin son is recovering. He'll be working by January. They are not negligent tenants, they are unfortunate ones. The distinction matters. My estate manager has a procedure for." "Your estate manager has a procedure for protecting the estate's income," she said. "That is his function. You have a different one. You are the Duke of Caervaun. The Trewins have been on this land for 4 generations. If you turn them out in January for a debt they will clear by March, you will not get those 4 generations back." Alaric looked at her for a long moment. "You have become remarkably informed about my tenants," he said. "I walk the cliff path every morning," she said. "People talk on cliff paths. They don't generally talk in estate offices." He extended the Trewins' payment period until March. He did not tell her he had done it. She found out from Mrs. Trewin 3 days later, and she said nothing to me about it. But I happened to be near the library window when she came in from the cliff path that morning, and I saw her expression before she rearranged it, and I filed it away. The thing I noticed in these weeks was that Alaric had started coming to dinner. Not the formal dinners, he had always come to those. I mean the household dinners, the ordinary evenings, the meals that a man in his position could easily take in his study and frequently did. He started coming. He sat at the head of the table, and Isolde sat on his right, and Miss Ashton sat across from Isolde, and they argued about things, about the Latin names of birds, about whether the cliff path was passable in a northeasterly, about a book Isolde was reading, and whether the protagonist had made a reasonable decision in Chapter 7. Alaric had opinions about Chapter 7. He had apparently read the book. I was reasonably certain he had read it in the last week specifically because Isolde was reading it, and I did not say anything about this because I valued my position. Miss Ashton had different opinions about Chapter 7. They debated them across the table with Isolde as a highly interested audience, and at one point Miss Ashton said, "You are misreading the character's motivation entirely, Your Grace. She is not being selfish. She is being precise about what she can actually offer, which is a form of honesty." And Alaric said, "The effect is identical to selfishness regardless of the interior motivation." And Miss Ashton said, "The effect is not the only thing that matters." And they looked at each other across the table. And Isolde looked at me, and I looked at my wine glass. In the 4th week, I began to notice something else. Alaric was not trying to win anymore. This sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. I had known Alaric Vane for 11 years, and in that time I had watched him in diplomatic meetings, parliamentary committees, estate disputes, and social negotiations of considerable complexity, and he was, in all of them, trying to win. Not crudely, he was a subtle man, but the objective was always the same. The conversation would end with his position intact and the other parties adjusted. The conversations with Miss Ashton were no longer ending that way. They were ending, and this was the remarkable part, with him listening. Actually listening, the way a man listens when he is genuinely interested in what comes next rather than preparing his rebuttal. She would say something about the cliff drainage or the tenants or chapter 7 of Isolde's book, and he would go quiet, and I could see him working through it, not to find the flaw, but to understand what she had seen that he hadn't. I mentioned this to him on a Thursday morning in the 5th week when we were reviewing correspondence, and he had been staring at the same letter for 4 minutes. "You've stopped arguing to win," I said. He looked up. "With Miss Ashton," I said, "you used to argue to close the matter, now you argue to extend it." He was quiet for a moment. "She is frequently right," he said. "You were right before she arrived," I said. "You argued to close those conversations too." He set down the letter. "What is your point, Cresswell?" "I have several," I said. "I'm not certain which one you're ready to hear." He looked at me with the expression he reserved for people who were being imprecise. "Say the relevant one." "You are the most uncontested man in Cornwall," I said. "You have been for 15 years. Every conversation you enter, you know before it ends how it will conclude. Every room you walk into, you know how it will settle. You have been, Alaric, I say this as your friend, you have been extraordinarily bored. And you did not know it because there was nothing to compare it to." He said nothing. "She argues like a barrister," I said. "You told me so yourself." "I told Mortimer," he said. "Mortimer was his valet." "Mortimer tells me everything," I said. "She argues like a barrister, and you have not been bored once in 5 weeks, and I think you should consider what that means before she finishes her contract and leaves." He stood up. He walked to the window that looked out over the cliff path, which was where Miss Ashton and Isolde would be at this hour, and he stood there for a moment, and I said nothing further. "She wouldn't leave," he said. "Before the contract ends, she has a responsibility to Isolde." "She has a 3-month contract," I said. "It ends in 3 weeks." He turned around. "I had assumed it would be renewed," he said. "Has anyone discussed renewing it?" A pause. "It is assumed." "Miss Ashton," I said carefully, "does not, in my observation, operate on assumptions. She operates on what has been explicitly said." He left the room. I sat for a moment in the quiet office with its ledgers and its correspondence and its view of the gray October sea, and I thought, finally, 15 years and finally. What happened next I know partly from observation, and partly from what Alaric told me afterward, on the evening of the same day, which was the most forthcoming he had been with me in years. He went to find her. She was on the headland with Isolde, but Isolde had gone ahead down the path, and Miss Ashton was standing at the cliff edge looking at something in the water, seals, as it turned out, 3 of them on the rocks below. Alaric came to stand beside her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and she did not look startled to find him there, which I think he noticed. "Your contract ends in 3 weeks, he said. "I am aware," she said. "I have not discussed renewing it." "No," she said. "I should like to discuss it now." She looked at him, and this time the expression on her face, he said, was not the considering a new argument expression and not the being patient with a slow point expression. It was something more careful than those. "What terms are you proposing?" she said. He had apparently prepared something sensible about salary and duration, and Isolde's continued education. What he said instead was, "I would like you to stay indefinitely." She was quiet. "That is not," he said, "a standard governess contract." "No," she said, "it is not." "I am aware that it is not," he said. "I am proposing it anyway." A pause. "I am doing this badly." "You are," she agreed, "though I appreciate that you are doing it at all." "I have not," he stopped, started again. "I have not asked for anything in a very long time. I find I have forgotten the correct approach." The correct approach, she said, is to say what you mean without the architecture of a negotiation around it. You are very good at the architecture. It gets in the way. What I mean, he said, and this, he told me, was the most difficult sentence he had said in 15 years, which is some measure of how thoroughly uncontested those 15 years had been, is that I would like you to stay because the alternative, which is you leaving, is the worst prospect I have encountered in recent memory, and I have encountered some poor prospects. And that is separate from Isolde, and I believe you know that it is separate from Isolde. She looked at the sea for a moment. The seals were still on the rocks below. The wind off the Atlantic was very cold and very clean. Your proposal, she said, is unclear in several respects. I know, he said. Are you proposing a renewal of the Governess contract, a different arrangement entirely? You have not specified. A different arrangement entirely, he said. That could mean several things. I am aware, he said. I am proposing the most significant one. She looked at him. He looked back. On the cliff path below them, Isolde was crouching over something on the rocks with the dedicated attention of a naturalist who has found something worth recording. Your proposal, Miss Ashton said, has no clear terms, no stated duration, and a vague object. Any magistrate in England would throw it out. I know, he said, amend it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the object is marriage, is that what you mean? Yes, he said. That is what I mean. The duration is permanent. Yes. The terms, she said, are that I continue to say what I think, and you continue to listen to it, and we disagree about Chapter 7 as long as we both shall live. Yes, he said, those are the terms. Then I accept, she said, though you should know your approach to proposals needs considerable work. I expect you will tell me how to improve it. Regularly, she said. And then, because she was Miss Verity Ashton, and not a woman who waited to be asked twice, she offered him her hand, the way her father had offered his hand across a courtroom, when a matter was settled, and he took it, and they stood on the cliff above the Atlantic with the seals on the rocks below, and Isolde coming back up the path with a piece of interesting quartz and the wind in the grass. And I was not there to see it, but Alaric described it to me that evening, and his voice had a quality I had not heard in it since before his parents died and he became the Duke, and learned to be uncontested. And I thought, yes, that is what a man sounds like when he has been surprised by something and is glad of it. They married 6 weeks later. I was the witness. Isolde was furious she was not the witness, and we compromised by having her carry the flowers, which she did with the seriousness of a girl conducting a scientific observation. The road from Truro was repaired before the wedding. The eastern barn drainage was redesigned in November. The Truans paid their debt in February, a month ahead of schedule, and sent a jar of preserved quince to Caervan Hall by way of thanks, which Mrs. Thwaite accepted on behalf of the household and which Miss Ashton, the Duchess of Caervan now, though she used the title with the same mild attention she gave to all the facts of her life, shared at the household dinner table. I have worked for Alaric for 16 years now. He is, by any external measure, the same man, correct about drainage systems, decisive in committee, unimpeachable in his management of the estate. The difference, and it is, I think, the most important difference, is that he is interested again. He reads things now not to confirm what he already knows, but to find out what he does not. He argues at dinner with the attention of a man who genuinely wants to know what the other person will say next. He has been wrong in the last year about 3 things, and he has said so, which 11 years ago would have been unimaginable. His Duchess continues to be right about most things. She has also, I should note, been wrong about Chapter 7. I told her so last month. She disputed this for 20 minutes and then said, I will need to reread it, which is as close to a concession as she comes, and Alaric looked at me across the table with the expression of a man watching something he loves. Isolde is 10 now. She has submitted a letter to a naturalist society in London describing the chuff pears of the Caervan Cliff Path, co-authored, at Miss Ashton's insistence, under both their names. The society has not yet responded. Isolde checks the post every morning. I told Alaric last week, when we were reviewing the correspondence, and he was not staring at a letter for 4 minutes, that I had been right about her from the beginning. You did say so, he said. I said it would be interesting, I said. I was understating the case, but the essential observation was correct. Cresswell, he said, in 16 years have you ever been wrong about anything? Chapter 7, I said. He laughed. He does that now with some regularity, and it is still, every time, the best sound in any room he is in.